This week on the Men at the Movies podcast, we break down the movie Defiance. In this time of busyness and chaos, how can we find freedom? How do we avoid becoming like the people around us, chasing, striving, and grabbing for life? The problem has been we've been using the wrong fuel. When we connect to the proper energy source, we can find joy in the chaos, light in the dark, and life from death. We can live defiantly. So join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me way down from Hotlanta, it's not Britt, it's somebody else who lives in Atlanta, but apparently a few people live in Atlanta, is my friend Dustin. Hey, Dustin, how you doing today, man?
Hey, Paul, I'm doing well. And you are right. There are a few people that live in and around Atlanta. In fact, we're recording this early in the morning, and I was already out fighting traffic this morning.
Oh, and you made it back already. That's crazy.
I did.
My wife and I went down for, she had some sort of class or conference there a couple of years ago. And we stayed like 2 miles from the place, but it would take like half an hour to get there because it doesn't matter what time of day, there is always traffic in Atlanta.
There really is. And one of my I have 3 boys. And so one of my common phrases is whenever we turn out of our neighborhood, there's kind of a main road. And when we see it backed up at the light, my common response, I don't know if I got it from a movie or an uncle or something, but I just kind of say out loud, "Not great, Bob." And so now my youngest, who's 4, he just sees a bunch of cars and he's like, "Not great, Bob."
See, that's what we're talking about today is what do we pass on to our children? What is the impact of our lives?
Yes.
And I feel like that feels like a Office Space comment. I think it actually is. I have friends who are Office Space junkies, so they'll be able to confirm or deny, but I feel pretty confident that's what it is. I feel like we should do that movie at some point on the podcast. Not sure if we will. The comment I frequently use is, I see you've been missing work lately. I wouldn't say I've been missing it, Bob.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So we're getting our jokes in early because the movie we're going to talk about, Defiance, is not a really light-hearted, funny movie. It's interesting because, Dustin, you emailed me sort of out of the blue, and you're like, "Oh, we just watched Defiance, and me and some other guys, and we think it'd be great for the podcast." And over the course of our email conversation, I was just like, "Well, why don't you come on and talk about it?" And so we finally got that scheduled. So when you were watching it, I try to lead off with the question of why did you pick this movie? Why did this one jump out to enough to email us? And you can email me, paul@menatthemovies.com, or you can look us up on Facebook. We're Men at the Movies, and say, "Hey, you guys should do this movie." And we are pretty, that doesn't mean you'll have to, come on the show or anything, but we're very willing to take recommendations. It's like you don't even have to put a tip in the jar. We'll play you a song for you. So Dustin, what is it about Defiance that jumped out at you to enough to reach out and say, "Hey, you guys should do this movie"?
Yeah, I grew up watching movies with my dad a whole lot. I grew up in the early 80s and absolutely loved all the Indiana Jones movies, Rocky.
Yeah.
I feel like those were the 2 that we bounced back and forth watching a ton. And I love the adventure. I love the fight. In this movie, Defiance is not one that I would just wake up and want to watch. As you mentioned a few minutes ago, it's very heavy. And when you realize, that it's a true story, it is very heavy. And the way I wake up and view the world is I feel a whole lot before I think. Some people have to think about, they have thoughts and they have feelings about their thoughts. And then others have feelings and then they have thoughts about their feelings.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for me to have thoughts and words about my feelings. I just feel.
Right.
And so, and for that reason, this is not a movie that I would want to watch. Really, I watched it again in preparation for this. I was like, oh gosh, what am I putting myself through? But what was so interesting to me about this movie and why I mentioned it to you, I think first, Paul, I grew up around church a whole lot. So I'm 39, and this is the first year that I have ever read the Bible. I think along the way, as I read through the Old Testament, somebody recommended watching Defiance because it really parallels a lot of what a lot of the Old Testament people were encountering as far as just the relationships and the struggle. And so I have a hard time reading in general. Being a feeler, I want to know the personalities. I want to know kind of what's going on. And so I was like, I'm going to watch this movie to see what it, maybe just to give me a little bit better picture of maybe what the Israelites were going through as they were wandering in the desert or as Moses was leading the Israelites out of captivity. And so that's where this movie was recommended. Like, hey, why don't you watch this movie Defiance? Because there's some similarities of someone rescuing a bunch of people, specifically during World War, and a bunch of Jews being, hunted, and a group of people, small group of people rescuing a bunch of others. And so I like the adventure. I like the rescue nature of being a rescuer and being a hero. But I was drawn to the main character and how real the main character is played by Daniel Craig. His name is I always mispronounce it. Is it Tuvia?
That's how I'd say it.
Tuvia.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was drawn to his character because as the main character, you can see his struggle, and I identify with he's in a world that's at war, in the World War, but in his own life, he's trying to figure out how to bring his true self to his world, and it doesn't go well for him a lot of the times. And I relate to that. Like there's a lot of things that don't go well in my life. and I have high expectations for myself, Paul. And sometimes it's real. And sometimes in my prayers to God, he's like, hey, it's okay to have high expectations, but you also need to understand that I love you for who you are. And so I'm in the season right now of learning to accept his acceptance of me. And I think for that reason, in the season that I'm in my life, I really related to Daniel Craig and his character in this movie, knowing that it's a true story of someone who was trying to figure out how to live his life and help other people, which I identify with, but he really gets a lot wrong and he gets some things right. So I think that's why I love the movie so much.
Yeah. You mentioned you have high expectations, but you have 3 boys.
Oh,
so
boy.
All that has to do is, hey, let's go out for dinner and things will go crazy. That's all you got to do, right?
Oh gosh. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's chaos. It is absolute chaos in my home. This morning I woke up and one kid was playing the guitar in his room and the other kid was clipping his fingernails. I mean, it was like 6:30 in the morning. It's just, there's activity happening all the time. And, I think that's another reason why this movie is about 3 brothers.
Yeah.
And that are in a world that's at war. And I'm a father of 3 boys, really trying to figure out what does it look like to raise young men in this world and give them awareness that they need to have at each stage of life. But in order to do that, I think a whole lot about what they're going to be like as adults, as 30 and 40-year-old men, and what I hope to have in relationship with them, and just to give them the proper awareness and what could come at them. So I really appreciated the dynamic between the 3 brothers also.
Yeah, because they're all 3 different. It was interesting. I actually wrote this down that the brothers, one fights, Liev Schreiber's character Zeus, his character is a fighter, brawler. He's the heavy, right? And that's his that's his gifting. That's his talent. And then you've got the other character, Asael, who's played by Jamie Bell. And he's lover. I mean, he loves people. He's not a strong guy. You know, he'll stand up for what he believes, but then he'll get punched in the face and be relegated to backup duty. And then Tuvia, who's played by Daniel Craig, as you mentioned, he's the leader. Like, that's his gifting, even though he sometimes, like us, gets taken to his knees by the burden of leading. We frequently get bombarded with the chaos, with the war, and a lot of times it's easy to look at the war outside as the problem, but we have that internal, the Civil War, as we were talking about before, of like Paul talks about in Romans 7. I do the things I don't want to do. I don't do the things I want to do. What am I going to do? And it's very easy to get paralyzed, and it's very easy to, respond in way, again, sort of furthering our brokenness. I was in therapy yesterday. I see a counselor, and yesterday I was like, I really get tired of being me sometimes. And so going back, we're going to set up the movie, and really the movie probably could be summed up. These brothers, the Bielski brothers, they escape this Nazi purge, and they actually kill their parents in one of the first scenes. And they run to the forest where they've grown up in. And as they're there, people are drawn. They hear about these guys that are living in the forest, these Jews. And so other Jews, and this is in Eastern Europe, I think maybe Belarus, maybe Western Russia. I'm not sure exactly the location, but so they're hiding in the forest, and over time they keep moving. They're camping, through World War II, the early 1940s. I think it starts in 1941, and that's basically the movie, is how to survive during World War II. And there's a scene early in the movie where they're starting to get, where people keep showing up. Like, there's even a scene where Zeus is like, hey, you're going to get food. Don't come back with more people.
Yes.
And so they go out, and a mission goes awry because they're going out for revenge. They're going out because they find out their wives have been killed. And so he wants revenge. And so he reacts, and Tuvia, and the clip starts with, this guy comes into camp, which means that security was lax because he got past security. And so people are freaking out about that. And then the guy comes from a town where some of the people are from, and they found out that they're all dead. And there's terror and there's panic. And the word you use, chaos. And Tuvia decides we are in the line that I love, that I wrote down, and we're going to unpack this quite a bit. He said, we might be hunted by like animals, but we won't live like one.
We'd be better off in the ghetto. At least here we are safe.
There, at least we had hope. No, here we have hope, do we?
We have no food.
Tomorrow will be another mission.
Look what happened last time.
That was a mistake. The mistake will not be made.
Well,
how do you know?
Just what?
We may be here a long time, so we have to prepare. How? Better security, better getting food.
We don't have weapons. People are getting sick. Look
We cannot afford revenge. Not now. We cannot afford to lose friends like Yakov and Peretz.
Or the soil.
We cannot lose anyone. We will map out where we have been, so as not to visit the same farms too often, and we will take only from those who can afford to give, and we will leave those who can't alone. Our revenge is to live.
The poorest farmer has more than us.
Quiet. What I am saying is we are not thieves or murderers. We may be hunted like animals, but we will not become animals. We have all chosen this. To live here free like human beings for as long as we can. Every day of freedom is like an act of faith. And if we should die, trying to live, then at least we die like human beings.
I liked the chaos where I don't even know what was being said. I don't even know really what Tuvia said at the end to shut everybody up. But that, not even externally, that is frequently my internal chaos. And I think this movie wrestles with, as he said, they are out there. They are refugees. They are being hunted and hated just because of what was in because of their blood, because of their genes, because they weren't there's Jews as a religious belief system, but these people are Jews just because of, like, I'm Scotch Irish, or some sort of variation of many different things, but basically because of where they came from, because of who they're descended from, they're being hunted and hated by people. And that idea, like, we might be hunted like animals, but that doesn't mean we have to become animals. And our response in that chaos, because in the world we live in, it's chaotic. And people, especially Christians, people who follow Jesus, believers, feel like we're being hunted, like our beliefs are being challenged, or, and especially in Western world, we think that criticism is persecution. And what I see and is we become like the people that we hate, or I don't even want to say hate. We become like the people who are persecuting us. We become like the people who are criticizing us. Mm-hmm. And this movie shows a way to say, yeah, we're not, as he said, the poorest farmer has more than us. That doesn't give us the right to take what he has. It's like, no, and we actually used this verse a few weeks. There's a way that seems right to a man. Mm-hmm. But our paths are ordained by God. So, Dustin, what in that clip, what in that scene stood out and resonated to you?
Well, the name of the movie is Defiance. And at face value, because of the movies that I grew up on, is like revenge. Like, I'm going to go take what I deserve. I'm going to go take what's quote unquote mine. Yeah. But in the context that you and I are talking about right now, Paul, this quote right here that Tuvia says, "Our revenge is to live," which he's casting a net to everyone that can hear him around. Our defiance is not the way you think it should be, the animal way, and because we are being hunted, but our act of defiance is actually to live. And he goes on to say that every day of freedom is an act of faith. Now, there's some parallels in this, like in the movie, where you see a rabbi teaching about Moses. You see, they're all Jews, and so in fact, his brother Zeus calls his brother Tuvia Moses at one point. Are you just going to go rescue everyone?
Are you Moses?
Yeah, right. And so that phrase, "our revenge is to live," like that, it flips the script upside down, which in the world that we live in, where everyone, especially right now, Paul, over the last couple of years with the pandemic, with the economy, with racial tension, all of that, everyone, for the most part that I have encountered, and I work in a world where I interact with a bunch of people one-on-one and in group settings, and the majority of people are operating very much in their reactive mode, like You and I were having a conversation earlier, kind of above the waterline, like what
Yeah.
we see, our actions and behaviors, and not necessarily who people truly are, like in their heart or in their inmost being, or the image of God that has been placed in them. And so, what I hear in Tuvia there, our revenge is to live, is not the quick reaction that most people are thinking in that moment. Everyone there is like, revenge, steal, take what's ours, which is oftentimes what we hear in the world. But in that moment, Daniel Craig, I just envision him accessing who God has placed him to be. Because he pauses for a moment. It's like, no, we're actually going to go against the grain, and our defiance is not the revenge that the world says we should do, because like we're being hunted, we should hunt them. But our defiance is to live. And so I was really, I got a little emotional in that moment. Of course, the music is playing, and it's really, really, it tugs on all the heartstrings and everything. But in that moment, I couldn't help but think about the offer that Jesus shares to us. And in John 10:10, he starts out by saying, "The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy." Animal ways.
Right.
And he's even referred to as a lion later on in Scripture. The enemy is. But then the second half of that verse, which y'all have talked about a lot on this podcast, Jesus says, "But I've come to give you life, and life to the full," or some versions say abundant life, or life overflowing. And I just connected that moment in the movie, this turning point where where he said, "No, we're actually going to choose life." And that really impacted me in the sense, because his choice to say that out loud, it gave people permission to start thinking that there is another way.
That's a really key piece, that Jesus said, I've come that you might have life, and life to the full, life abundant, life overflowing. And our reaction is, all right, Jesus came to give it to me, so I need to go get it. I need to go chase it. I need to, very, like you said, the animal response. And as I started kind of processing this, I see this throughout the movie, the animalistic reaction, some people call it the lizard brain, right? The response that's just sort of a biological, like the animal world. In the animal world, the strongest win, right? That's the cycle of life. The lion eats the antelope because that antelope wasn't fast enough. The strongest take what they want. So if we want life, we've got to go get it. That's what the culture teaches us. That's what the world teaches us. We have to go chase it. We have to go fight for it. And that idea is like, as you were just talking, I was like, how do we see that Jesus said, and we say, well, I don't have abundant life. I don't have overflowing life. One, I must be doing something wrong, right? I'm not doing something right. And the other is, how do we're like, oh, if I'm going to get it, I've got to go take it. And this like this sum zero game. If I have more life, that means you have to have less life. And because when we enter into dialogue and all this stuff that I see, I really shouldn't be on social media, but I see it. And even some of the conversations with my friends, I'm, whether it's over gun control or over masks or vaccines or politics or whatever, take your pick. We devolve into animals because we start arguing the way the world argues. Oh, you're going to throw your facts at me. I'm going to throw my facts back at you. Oh, you're going to tell me a story about this. Your friend took this medicine and felt better. I'm going to tell you the story about the research that shows this. There's always this back and forth. Somebody has to be right. Somebody has to be wrong. But I think it lowers us because we become who we're sort of fighting with. Again, we might be hunted by like animals, but that doesn't mean we have to become one. And yet, when it comes to argument, we fight the same way. We argue the same way. We use the same tactics. But what tactics did Jesus use? And in this movie, what tactics does Tuvia show? It's like, no, we're not going to take. Might does not make right. The loudest voice does not always win. And it's turning to Jesus and saying and walking more. And we were talking before about John Eldridge has a new book out called Resilience. And it's about how to live, how to maintain, really how to live like humans in an animal world, how to live like people, like little Christs was C.S. Lewis's term for what we should be like, little Jesuses. How do we live like Jesus in a world that really doesn't want us to? That tries to get us to act like them. And I don't, you can say, I'm not saying they're trying to talk us into sinning or acting, whatever. But this idea that we argue like them and we live like them and we think what they think is important, like more likes on social media, bigger audience for your podcast, or a bigger church, or nicer clothes, a better car, well-behaved kids. Those are all great things, but that's not, going back to John 10:10, that's not abundant life. Because when you're out to dinner with your 3 boys, it doesn't matter if you're at McDonald's or you're at Ruth's Chris. If you don't have peace and contentment and love and joy in that situation, it's all for nothing.
Yes. As you were talking about that, the whole concept of resilience, you referenced the new book by John Eldridge, and this concept of when it's introduced in the movie, this clip that we just listened to, of we are choosing, our revenge is to live. It's important to probably define what that means, which we're teasing out in the moment. It's not to live like they see other people living and mimicking that. It's choosing to live in such a way that they are going to live off a different kind of fuel than what other people live off of. And
that's great. Yeah.
When Jesus talks about, the invitation is life. The invitation for you is life. That can be interpreted a lot of different ways. And the way that he's talking from in that moment, I am learning, Paul, is that he's saying, no, instead of living off of diesel fuel, you're going to live off of, regular fuel. And a good friend of mine, his name's Alex, mentioned this to me the other day in a group of guys. Someone asked him how he's doing after we had a retreat experience last year, and we were all kind of going around how we're doing. And, there can be these mountaintop experiences that we can be kind of in the clouds, but eventually you got to come back down the mountain and live your life. Right. And the way he described his life after he had a really deep encounter with Jesus and with the Father, and understanding more of how he's differentiating between, yes, God's always with me. I want the life Jesus offers, versus what we were just praying before we came on. Paul was like, we get that, but you're actually always pursuing us, Father. And I want to learn how to access your presence amidst the chaos, no matter what the outcomes are. And so what my friend Alex said, this life that Jesus offers, he's like, I'm realizing that the fuel I lived on for the first 30 plus years of my life was the wrong fuel. It was receiving knowledge. It was listen to this, read that, which all are really good things. But what's the motive and what's behind it? And so he, as over the past 6 months, he's living off a different fuel where he's like, I want to sit with God and I want to understand what this life is you offer, because you do offer it to everyone, but I have to understand what fuel I'm living on. And the presence of God, learning to live in the presence of God, even when chaos is around me with my 3 boys, or there's tension around me because of pandemic and mask, no mask. Goodness, do we go into the office? Do we stay at home? Why are gas prices so high? Is there going to be is there going to be another Great Depression? There's so much speculation around, but like in the moment, I can't control all that. The fuel I'm choosing to live on is God's presence. and that he actually offers me something greater than the world can offer. And that the way that he describes, Tuvia describes the way of life is that every day is an act of freedom. I want that. Every day of freedom is an act of faith. And so he references that in that clip we just listened to. And who doesn't want to be free? You know what? So it begs the question for me, like, what do I feel enslaved to? What am I attached to that does not line up with this quote unquote fuel or invitation to life that Jesus offers that is causing me to run on the wrong fuel? And it which I don't necessarily have the answer to, but I'm learning things that, oh, wow, I live on, I'm living on this, and I'm attaching myself to, let's just take the identity piece. I can live off of the affirmation I get at the job world. And did I close this deal? And did I make more than I did last year? And did I get the pat on the back from the boss? And if I'm attached to that, that's the fuel I'm living on. And when it doesn't happen, then I feel like I'm the worst person in the world. And from God's perspective, and Jesus is like, no, I'm offering you life. I'm not offering you a job and affirmation from another man or woman, that whoever you report to. And it is very, it's a very small line. And the motive in which we are wanting to receive from other people or receive from God, and what fuel we live on. But it's really, it was really impactful to me in that scene, because Daniel Craig in that moment is choosing to say, we're living a different way. And the fuel we run on is we're choosing to live rather than to go kill.
Right.
And it was very profound for me in my life.
And it's a great question, because I think a lot of times the fuel is a mix. Sometimes we mix the diesel with the high octane stuff, and it's like, it's never going to be all 100% God's fuel. It's always going to be some mix. Hopefully we're sort of shifting over to the correct ingredients, because we don't, as physical and spiritual beings, we just don't run as well when we run from the fuel that the world gives us. And, it's very easy when your kids, stuff happens to your kids and they go off the rails and, stop going to church or start partying or doing all this other stuff. And you're like, wait, I thought it's very easy to take that personally, like we failed. Or like you said, is, your kids can be your validation, your job, your wife, all sorts of things. As we're wrestling with stuff, I told my wife the other day, like I've got some stuff to work out, because like I find that I am deathly afraid of disappointing her. Like almost a panic level of attack inside me is like want to start hyperventilating and stuff at the thought of it. And of course we shouldn't want our wives to be disappointed in us or whatever. But the phrase that we frequently use is what feels like death. It's like, if that feels like death, then that's probably too much of an attachment to something. Mm-hmm. That it's a sign. I think that's a good way to say is, if we're tying into the wrong fuel, it feels like death to not have it. When what we should be attached to, what we should have greater union with, is God and the power of the Spirit, which is really what John's book Resilience is about. It's about connecting in a deeper way with God so that we can maintain, because the alternative is this next clip I'm going to play. And the Tuvia and Luge and a couple other guys went on a mission because disease was running through the camp. They needed antibiotics. So the only way to get it was to attack this police station. A couple of the guys died. So this is the rabbi sort of doing the funeral services for the men that died there. But what it is a very honest response of a man who is at the end of his rope, who is out of life, who really doesn't know where to go next. And so, so here he is. Here's the rabbi sort of doing the praying over these men at the funeral.
Merciful God, we commit our friends Benzion and Krensky to your care. We have no more prayers, no more tears. We have run out of blood. Choose another people. We have paid for each of your commandments. We have covered every stone and field with ashes. Sanctify another land. Choose another people. Teach them the deeds and the prophecies. Grant us but one more blessing. Take back the gift of our holiness. Amen.
That's such a take back the gift of our holiness. And holiness is not, this religious term that means like you live, the holy rollers, or, we live in the South. So when you say holy, you think of somebody who doesn't cuss or drink or chew or, go with girls to do, right? But in them, the holiness is this: you are a set apart people. You are, and that's what holy means, is set apart for a special purpose. And we get to this point, and I've been there, was like, I'm out of gas. I don't want to do this. And it's very similar to Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane. Take this cup from me. Please, but Jesus didn't sort of take that last step. And we don't actually see the rabbi lose his faith through the movie. He comes very, very close at this moment, because all he sees is death. All he sees, it's the middle of the winter. They're out of food. People are dying. He's like, all because of who they are. Like, it's nothing they controlled. In that sense of, I love that honesty of take away our holiness. Do this one last blessing for us. Make us not special. Make us not sacred and set apart. Basically, give us back to being the animals, so we can deal with life better, I guess. Because I think we all get to a point where just we sort of are on our knees saying, I can't do this anymore.
Oh yeah. I think to my own life, and that this movie shot in early 1940s. And so this Jewish rabbi is not wanting to be, he doesn't want to be the person that was born Jewish anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't have, as born a white male, when it comes to race and the ancestry I was born into, I don't wake up in that world, right? But in the context of following Jesus, there are moments in my life, multiple moments, where I'm at the end of my rope and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I cannot live the life that you are telling me to live, God. There's a difference between being a sinner saved by grace and someone who is, like the Apostle Paul talks about, I'm writing to the saints in the world. So there's the gospel of salvation that is beautiful, and Jesus rescues us. We go from not following him to following him and becoming a part of God's family, and progressing forward. Not really even forward, but I think more deeper into understanding, wow, yeah, it's not just about me going to church and reading the Bible. Those are good things, but my identity is actually being changed. And I'm a son of God, and I'm becoming a son of the Father. And he is fathering me in such a way of teaching me how to live in this world, amidst the chaos, and being deeply in union with him. But even in the season that I'm in, of seeking after that, there are moments where I'm at the end of my rope. And I have, in the last decade of my life, there's been multiple times where my circumstances has really caused me to go into really dark places and deep depression, and wanting to say, you referenced the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus says, take this cup from me. And this rabbi in that scene says, take this away from me. I don't even want to live this life anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to be who I am. And you jokingly said you were in therapy the other day, and I forget the words you used.
I am tired of being me.
I'm tired of being me. So many people in the summer think of vacation, and, a lot of people get to do that. The problem with vacation is that I go with me.
Right. It's like new
There's
golf clubs. I might have new golf clubs, but I got the same crappy swing.
Right. I mean, I can go to a different place and experience a beautiful lake or a beach or go camping or something, but all of my stuff still goes with me.
Yeah.
And that invitation, I'm learning, is when I put myself in the rabbi's shoes, I don't want to be this anymore. Or you referenced, it feels like death to continue in this way. The invitation that Jesus has for me, and I think for all of us, is if that feels like death, if I don't want that anymore, if I sit long enough in that, then there's something better. There's something better that he wants to offer me. And if I'm willing to move away from the things that I've attached myself to, or the outcomes that I'm trying to control, or even the things that I choose to eat or participate in, and choose the life that Jesus says that I want to offer, and can tap into the deep beliefs that God has instilled within me of who Dustin is, there can be a lot of joy. There can even amidst my workday, there can be a whole lot of joy that I access in who he's created me to be. Because like the rabbi, I have said, I don't like myself. In fact, I have dealt with a lot of self-hatred in my own life, and it's led me to depression and not wanting to be who I am. But my defiance, Paul, my defiance is joy. My defiance is finding joy in the little things and outwardly expressing that I love Dustin, that I love who God has chosen to create in Dustin, and that I can look in the mirror and say, I love who you have created me to be, God. And it's awkward to look in the mirror and say that to myself. But that's where this movie, in that moment, when the rabbi said that, I went to my lowest moments where I have screamed to God, where are you? And I have screamed to God, is this really it? Is this is this life? And our Father, in all of his grace, he's like, no, you're just living on the wrong fuel. And my act of defiance is to find joy in the little things. When I'm eating cereal with my 4-year-old last night, and he eats so loud, so loud. And I think are you familiar with misophonia, where you have like certain noises that just trigger you?
No, but that makes complete sense.
That's the misophonia. There's certain noises, or maybe smells too, that just trigger us. I think it's noises. And loud eating or biting of metal spoons for me just gets me. So I wanted to flip out at my 4-year-old, but in the moment I was just like, no, this moment, there's joy in this. I'm getting to eat cereal with my 4-year-old son and just crunch as loud as possible. And I'm going to have a blast doing this, instead of flipping out at him and saying, that dad doesn't like it whenever you choose. You know what I'm saying? There's this act of defiance. It's something so small like eating cereal, but I can find joy in it, and I can tap into that different fuel that Jesus invites me into. And it's those little wins where I'm like, wow, I think I can live on this fuel of the life that Jesus invites me into, that's so much greater than what the world offers. Because what the world offered me in that moment was to flip out at my son and be an animal, and to control the situation and to control him. And what's that going to do for him? He's going to live in fear as a little 4-year-old boy that he can't chew around his dad. Oh my gosh, I get a little emotional thinking about it, but in the moment, I chose joy and to sit down with him rather than to leave the room and to leave him by himself, a little 4-year-old eating cereal. I sat down next to him and like this, I'm defying what maybe the world or what Dustin would typically do in the past, but I'm going to find joy in this situation and sit down right next to my son and chomp as loud as possible at this
Nice.
cereal.
And that's what we see as we talk about our last clip here. So throughout the movie, we see that the choices that people make. We see, even when Lilka is coming back with food and the wolf attacks her and she has to kill the wolf. We see when they take a German prisoner. And it was such a painful scene because they treat the German the way that they have been treated. They claim for justice. They want revenge. And this guy becomes their piñata to release all their frustrations. There was a guy, Arcady, who sort of, again, he's like, no, the fighter should get more food. And so he punched a sail. He took control. It was very much, the alpha males fighting for the leadership of the pack, and Tuvia shot him. And so they have all these, you see them devolving into animals through a lot of things. And there was a scene towards the end, a woman got pregnant. She'd been raped by one of the Germans, and it was springtime now. And Tuvia heard a baby crying and it just was like, that's against my orders. I said, we can't, you can't keep a kid quiet. We just can't handle babies. So no getting pregnant. And so he's responding to his defiance of the orders. And Lilka, who, as you mentioned, is sort of his love interest, becomes his wife. She, as we like to see in these movies, the female is a strong female who, when we have started to drift away, reminds us of who we are. And she throws his words back into his face as they're arguing about what to do with the woman and her child.
She promises not to take extra food.
Against my orders.
So you're going to shoot her too? Please, Tuvia. The baby is all she has to live for.
I cannot allow it.
You must let it live.
I cannot keep the living alive!
Tamara and the man who fathered this child are responsible for it. They must leave.
She was raped by the Germans. You tell us to hold on to our humanity, not to become like animals. And what better way than by bringing a life into this world of suffering and death? It is our only hope.
What better way than by bringing life into this world of suffering and death? When we talk about what our role is, how to maintain our, the human versus animal, how do we do that? How do we do that? It's by bringing life, not death, not suffering. And as you mentioned, bringing joy to that situation that would otherwise be a problem. I had some friends over last night. We sat out on the porch and my grandson was here. My daughter had been working and I'd watched him that day. So he was still bouncing around. And we're out there having a drink and a couple of us pulled out some pipes to smoke. And he comes out and of course, he's like, oh, I have to have a drink. So he goes, gets his juice, sits on the chair, puts it right next to us. He goes and gets his pacifier because he's like, well, you guys have a pipe, I'll have a passy. and I'm like, and I tell them, it's like, yeah, this is supposed to be, our time, guys. But yeah, there is 0% chance I'm kicking him out because he is life, right? This is joyful. He wants to be a part of the guys and I'm not going to kick him out. And how do we show that light? Because when we bring life, Tuvia had lost vision. He's like, I can't keep the living alive because that's not his responsibility technically. Like he's got no control over who lives or dies. All he can do is the best that he can do. All he can do is, what is lead them through that. People are going to die, especially in the 40s. There's not a lot of medicine, they're in the woods. But that idea is like, I can't keep the living alive. And now it's one more mouth to feed, one more thing, one more, this. I feel that way. I feel like I can't do what I'm doing. How can I add more to it? Mm-hmm. And she responds with such grace and such a beautiful offer. Is like, you've told us that we must be humans. What better way to be human than by bringing life into this world of suffering and death?
Yeah, I love what you said about how so often in our own life, and we see it in movies, which I think you say in the introduction to this, every movie borrows its power from the larger story that we live in the context of who God is, and that Jesus comes to rescue. What does it say in Isaiah? To heal the brokenhearted and to set the captives free. We all live in a world at war, and we are all hunted in the context of that larger story. And every movie borrows its power from that gospel, the gospel of salvation, the gospel of the kingdom. And we both have wives, and I have a mentor that says, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes when my wife looks me in the eye and speaks very slowly, actually the majority of the time, I need to pay attention because that's usually God speaking. Not all of the time, but sometimes. And so in that clip right there, where she brings so much honesty and she risks something, she and Tuvia have really got a really close connection. And she even says in that clip, I don't know if it's mentioned there, she says eventually that I'm not even scared of you.
Right.
Even though he's the leader of the camp, and she just saw him not too long ago shoot and kill someone. And she says, "Oh, what are you going to do? Kill her and the baby too?" And so she risks so much and brings so much strength in that scenario. And I want that. I want to bring true strength to my world in risk, and because she loves someone. So she's risking in love and bringing her true strength, and says that why don't we bring life into this, to bring so much hope to this camp who's trying to figure it out. And because it comes from this feminine presence who is very strong in that moment and a strong character, plays a small role in the movie, but says something very profound. It in the context that we're talking about, Paul, it reminds me, we have God. We have God who brings his great heart to the world, and people have the choice whether or not to receive it or not. Right. There is this masculine presence in which he expresses himself, and a feminine presence. He created Adam and Eve. And in that moment, we see the fullness of the feminine presence and how we all learn femininity in some way. And so the mother heart of God is expressed in that character, in that moment right there, where she brings self-worth, which we all need from God. We need identity and validation from the Father, but there's self-worth that comes from the feminine voice oftentimes, whether it's a grandmother, a teacher, a coach, a mom, a neighbor. We need that self-worth, that gentleness that is fierce, but that gentleness that we all need in our lives as we grow up. We need that. Because oftentimes the masculine voice doesn't bring that. It can, but it doesn't. Sometimes that's not the way it's, we're wired. And so that strength and compassion that she brings in that moment really draws me to the greater understanding of how God brings women into young women's lives, into young men's lives, into men's lives, and into my life, and how I need that. I need to be given very hard truth, but in a gentle way that just reminds me of the dignity of humanity in that moment, which she brings, which is such a beautiful picture in the World War II, the Jewish scenario, as she's bringing so much dignity to humanity, no matter what race. And this child's being born into a Jewish cult, and there's so much chaos in it. I can see Tuvia's reaction and wanting to control the situation and act like an animal and end it. Like, I can't take care of the living. Why would we bring another life in? But man, she brings so much of what Jesus says, the true life. We're going to live off of true life and offer hope, and not live out of fear and what I can't control. And so it's a beautiful picture of what God brings to us, and brings dignity to every human being, no matter how helpless they may be, like an infant, or in some people's lives, maybe listening, it's a 98-year-old that's living with them, and they are helpless. But God has something for them in that moment, and there's life there, there's dignity there, and God is the one that chooses when people live and when people die. And it's a powerful thing to sit in long enough and being like, who is it in my world that is speaking self-worth into me? In that moment is what I drew out of it, wanting to thank people in my life who's given me self-worth, my mom being one of them, and then other people that I've learned femininity from, that mother heart of God, the feminine heart of God, of bringing self-worth, is people that I want to thank in my life.
Right. Yeah, it's important. And we see, I'm not going to play the clip, but the rabbi, when he dies, he thanks Tuvia for, it's like, God sent you. You are a gift from God. And he's like, that's crazy. That's ridiculous. He's like, I know, but I'm still going to thank you. And before I die, I'm going to thank him. And before I die, I want to thank you. Mm-hmm. Because there is an importance. All this is for a purpose. And we see that at the very end of the movie when it's showing what happened they lived in the forest for 2 more years. When the war ended, over 1,200 people survived. That would have gone to the death camps, that would have gone, that may not have otherwise survived. So for what these 3 brothers did, 1,200 Jews survived. And then their children and their grandchildren are in the tens of thousands now. And so from the act of these 3 men, you see an impact that lasts much longer than their life, because they chose to act like humans and not diminish themselves, not devolve into animals. And sometimes it does take the little rock in the river to change the course. Like we see with Lilka that did that said, oh, you're heading in this wrong direction. You're only concerned about the living. But what kind of life is that? It's not living if it's just breathing, eating, that sort of thing. It's living when we're bringing life into a world of death and suffering. And that's what our calling is as believers. It's not to live and survive and scratch. It's to bring light and to bring life into the world.
We've said it a couple of different ways, probably so far in the last little bit, but the name of the movie, Defiance, and one of the clips we watched is that their act of defiance, their act of revenge, is to choose life. And ultimately, that was their fight. And you reference Zeus being the fighter and going to fight and to kill and destroy, which that was his choice. And there's moments where that probably needs to happen, right? However, the whole storyline of the movie for me, as I received it, was all along like that. Daniel Craig's character, his fight was to choose life. And what I appreciate about it so much throughout the movie, and then seeing the generations that were impacted because of his choice, his way of fighting was to choose life. As we mentioned, Jesus saying, I'm offering you life. It offers generational hope. And he didn't know what hangs in the balance in that moment when he chose that. In that first clip we watched, that we're choosing life, that's our revenge. And every day where we choose freedom, that freedom is an act of faith. He didn't know what hangs in the balance, that 100 years later, 150 years later, it's going to be generations, and he's bringing generational hope. And that was his act of defiance. And I think for me, I think about little moments in my day where I'm choosing that life that Jesus offers, and my act of defiance is to choose joy in the little things and to not give in to the animal ways, but that I can offer generational hope if I can build up a strength to offer my world and to risk doing something different and going against the grain in the world, that it offers generational hope. And that's something that in my 3 boys, I hope to bring, that when they're 30, when they're 40, when I'm, no one even remembers my name, in 50 years, 80 years, I'm just not good. It's the things that we can instill in the people around us that God entrusts to our care. we really can make a generational impact because we're choosing something so different. And we see that in moments in this movie, and it's inspiring to me that based on this true story, to see those last comments of the generations that have been impacted, and you even see some of the ways that they have gone on to live their life and what they offer the world, which is so powerful. And so it's I think it's why it's an honor to talk about stuff like this, because it's affirming to me that there's other people in this world that want to live that way. And there's probably more than what we even see. It's just we don't engage in these types of conversations, Paul. And so I think for that reason, it's such an honor to be able to talk about stuff like this with you. And it's been a gift to me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking your time and suggesting this movie, and just want to say thank you for being a part of this conversation, Dustin. It's been awesome.
I've enjoyed it too, Paul.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Dustin Oprea talking about Defiance. We hope that you go out and live a life of defiance and choosing life and light over the darkness and suffering and animal urges that you might have. And I hope you, like I said, I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?